welcome to another exciting episode of Gar Borras' Time Machine. Gar, can you believe we've already made it to episode 19?
Yes. Time's flying. This is so much fun to do. I love doing this. I love pop culture, and this whole thing just kind of took its natural own course.
Yeah.
It was never a planned thing. It just our interviews developed into this, and it's just so much fun.
Yeah, because initially, as people know, that I interviewed you about some of your favorite albums, and that's kind of what started. And the more of the interviews we did, I thought, this guy is really knowledgeable of what he's speaking of. Not only that, but I thought, okay, if we can have this much fun talking about, music, which sometimes we do in Gar Borras' Time Machine. We've done an episode on, Alice Cooper and Black Sabbath, and I'm planning to do more down the line. But, I thought it'd be fun to get into some of our favorite classic TV shows and movies, and there's going to be more and more about it. And I think what keeps Gar Borras' Time Machine so fresh is when you tune in, you never know what you're going to get. I mean, there's so much of this stuff to talk about. And to kind of let people know what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about the Monkees. And this is going to be a real fun topic, Gar, because before I have you tell us how you got into the Monkees and all of that, I got to say, I think that what made this such an interesting show is, from my perspective, as I've shared before, I was born in the world. I did not come into the world until 1971, July 4th. But I got to make that point because you're a little bit older than me. And the way I got introduced to the Monkees was, it was around, I want to say 1986 or so. And they kind of started airing old reruns on MTV. I remember when they still had MTV back in the day. And so that was kind of my introduction. And people like you were already aware of the Monkees, but I'm hearing about the Monkees and learning about them for the first time. And it's time I'm thinking the Monkees, was actually a real band. And they got to that point eventually. But if you go on the Wikipedia, it says the Monkees was an American TV sitcom that aired on NBC TV from September 12th, 1966 to March 25th, 1968. And of course, it was very much a sitcom, but I remember even being introduced to the Monkees when MTV started playing all the reruns, in the 80s, and I'm thinking, oh man, this is a band from back in the 60s, and we'll get into that. So I want to hear what your perspective was when you first got introduced to the Monkees.
When I was a kid, of course, the Beatles was just absolutely huge.
Yeah.
They're coming across the pond to
America,
become part of America and entertainment in America. It was just this huge thing that was going on back in the 60s, and it just kind of created this whole thing, where a lot of entertainers during the 1960s didn't write their own material and didn't, all they did was perform, they would sing the material, but as far as like creating the songs and all that stuff, and it was just a normal part of practice at that time that, there were, the songwriters were separate from the actual entertainers that were performing the material. So it just was a natural thing for somebody in a studio to come up with the idea because of the popularity of the Beatles and the popularity of their movies like Hard Day's Night and all that stuff. We could come up with a TV show with that basic premise, and they did auditions and things like that, and put the band together, and it was a completely manufactured thing by the studios. And the Beatles at that time were not only changing and changing music because it was a pivotal point between the Elvis Presley style of music, and just pivoting from that to the rock and roll, so it was just a very fertile time for new ideas, and so they just came up with this idea and put it on as a TV show, and the public just ate it up, because when I was a kid, I just latched onto the show right away.
Yeah, in fact, I dare say, in any of the research I've done on this episode we're doing today, what I've come to find out is the guys that play the Monkees, they were actually more actors than they really were musicians. In fact, only two of the guys in the band were actually musicians, and that's Michael Nesmith and Mickey Dolenz. And in fact, they're the only two members of the band that once they kind of demanded they wanted to start writing their own songs, they were the two guys that got songwriting royalties because they were allowed to contribute to the songwriting eventually. But another thing that should be noted is a name that's come up in the past when you and I have done one of these interviews. In fact, I think we've done an interview on Edgar Winter, and his album, I think, came out in 1972 called They All Come Out at Night. That album features, of course, Free Ride and Frankenstein as two massive radio hits. And we were mentioning it in that episode that he appeared, you can go online and check it out. Edgar Winter appeared on this thing called Don Kirshner's rock concert. Don Kirshner, come to find out, was also very involved in the Monkees. He was a producer for a TV show. He was involved, from what I understand, in getting a lot of the songwriters that would write the songs. And eventually, when the Monkees wanted to start kind of doing their own thing, they're demanding not so much outside involvement. Don Kirshner was eventually let go, and then the very next season, because the show only lasted for 2 seasons, and then the Monkees kind of ended after that. But it's kind of interesting in doing these interviews, come to find out, like Don Kirshner, while he would go on to have his own kind of rock concert TV show that we were talking about in one of the past episodes, before that, he was very involved with the Monkees.
And that is kind of like the battle between the studio wanting to have full control of it versus the band, the people that are acting on it, kind of looking at it the same way that Milli Vanilli was looking at what they were doing, which was kind of similar. They were put together, by someone else, marketing, and then having someone else actually singing and actually playing the music, and it was just basically a whole marketable thing that was put together. Most bands kind of come together organically, but TV shows and studios, none of that is organic.
And again,
all like preconceived. And Don Kirshner wanted to do it where he had full control, and the TV stars wanted to not be, not being, vulnerable. I guess that's the word I was looking for. Vulnerable to the fact that if the public finds out that they're not actually playing their instruments and everything, it's all a big ruse, and they're going to lose their credibility. So the actors, they were acting on their instincts about their credibility, and the studio didn't really care about any of that because they wanted to manufacture their own marketability.
Yeah, and what's interesting about once again, so many times, and we've talked about these great classic TV shows that we grew up on, how, like you're saying, the studio wanted to kind of stay in control of everything, But what's interesting in the Monkees is I agree very much what you said about comparing it to Milli Vanilli. But I think the Monkees, they were a little more honest. Like the thing with Milli Vanilli is they tried to hide it, and then when they were doing something live, they got caught using a tape and stuff, and then they had to come out. Okay, this is the producer kind of with Milli Vanilli kind of came out, and he destroyed everybody's reputation, and it kind of went the other way. But what's kind of interesting when you look at the Monkees, I also say the Monkees really kind of predate. It was kind of a precursor for American Idol in the sense that American Idol, you don't have a bunch of actors trying to be, but you have these people that are trying to get famous by going on this TV show, and they're all told, okay, well, if you want to appear on our show, we will get other people to write songs for you, but you got to do it our way, and so it's not so much a farce where, as a musician yourself, Gar, when you were trying to make it in the 80s doing original music, I mean, you realize a big part of that is wanting to write your own, having the desire to write your own music, and I mean, you'd much rather make it doing your own original music if you had the choice than having somebody coming on every album and having other people write your music for you. I mean, I think that's the big difference here.
Well, the Beatles was the pivotal band that changed that. Yeah. Because before the Beatles, there was a separation between the songwriters and the performers. And then the Beatles came along and they were the performers and the writers. And so that just changed the dynamic of everything. Yeah. And of course, what happened to the Monkees, the backlash, because it wound up becoming exposed that they weren't playing their instruments, and it was a manufactured thing, and there was a backlash, just like what happened to Milli Vanilli.
Yeah. Fair comparison.
It just but the thing that really kind of gets your attention about this is the show only lasted 2 seasons, but yet it made everyone so iconic that that people still know who the Monkees are today.
Yeah.
From a TV show that only lasted 2 seasons, that would, by today's standards, that would be considered a failure.
Yeah, we'll get into the exact numbers later, but here's an interesting fact that I came across just to kind of prove that point. I was reading that the Monkees actually they sold more records. So people were, back in the day when there was a TV show was still on, people were more into buying the records for whatever reason than they were tuning into the TV show. But the records sold more than the ratings were on the TV show, which is kind of interesting, because there's that farce. A lot of people like me, and probably you at the time, thought the Monkees are a real band, and then, like you said, once it kind of got exposed, there was a huge a backlash, and I think it even got to the point where the band actually had such a desire to kind of want to prove they could do it on their own. And what's interesting again is 2 of the members were actually musicians. I mean, I think Michael Nesmith, one of the guitar players, and I think Mickey Dolenz, he's the only one that's still alive from the band. I think they were the 2 musicians in the band. What's kind of interesting is...
Well, Peter Tork was also a musician.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that, but...
yeah.
But whereas Davey Jones, what's interesting is because the Monkees are supposed to kind of be patterned after the Beatles, if you look at the haircuts, you can kind of see that. Now Davey Jones, being the front man and the supposed singer of the band, at the time, I'm thinking all the guys in the band are English, because again, we're thinking they're supposed to be like the Beatles. He has an English accent, but then if you go a little deep, he's the only one that actually is from England or anything. And but again, at the time, I'm thinking they were all from England, because that's how the band was presented.
Well, they were kind of the precursor to the boy bands.
Yeah.
Because they're just like the Beatles at that time. Part of the what really made the public latch onto them was, the appeal to the girls. Each one of the Beatles, there was the fan base that was the Paul McCartney ones that, oh my gosh, Paul McCartney is so cute, and then there was the George Harrison ones, and then there was the Ringo Starr ones, and then there was the John Lennon. Each group had their own favorite member of the band, and that same thing took its natural development with the Monkees. There was the people that the girls that gravitated towards the Davey Jones, and then there was the girls that gravitated towards the Mickey Dolenses, and then the ones that gravitated towards the Peter Tork. So they had that same attachment with the public.
Yeah.
And the thing that was weird was, because the studio wanted control. They basically, Peter Tork was a better guitarist than Mike Nesmith, but they decided that Peter Tork would be the bass player, even though he never really did any bass playing. He was a guitar player. And then the same thing with Mike Nesmith. He got to play guitar, but they actually had a better guitarist than him. And then Mickey Dolenz didn't know how to play a lick on the drums, and then basically he got the basics down from Davey Jones, because Davey Jones was the only one that in the band that knew anything about drums. So they were all forced to portray themselves as playing an instrument that was not a strong point for them. Now, here's what happened to me when they started playing live and performing their music. Because of this, and they first started performing, they were still kind of doing what they were forced to do on the TV show, which was not their strong points. And when I heard the music, I was not impressed with it at all. I was going, oh God, it's really obvious that these guys are trying to hold it up, and they're just not strong musicians, and the floor fell out from underneath for me, because I was not realizing that they were actually playing instruments that were not their strong points. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it just kind of killed it for me at that time.
Yeah.
I fell into the same thing. Later on, when they started, touring, they started playing the instruments that they were more,
comfortable with,
adept to playing, and then their tours went a lot better. But their first tours, they were not playing their strong point instruments, and it came through. And I think I'm just an indication of other people that lost interest because they started buying into the fact that they were just a studio TV show produced thing. It was not a real band. They lost their credibility with a lot of people when that happened.
Oh yeah, and it's very interesting because I believe at one point the band they went through a lot because of what a farce it kind of turned out to be. I think the band kind of number one, they started to believe their own hype. Number two, I think very much like with the Beatles we talked. I'm a huge Kiss fan, and Kiss was almost like at a teen idol kind of point in their career back in the 70s. All four guys did a solo album. They did a movie. The members of Kiss were like kind of competing, who was more popular and all that. Bands go through these type of things. And I think the other thing with the Monkees is you had some guys in the band who were actual musicians. And I think once the backlash started, they wanted to kind of prove, hey, you know what? We don't really need people to write music. When we were doing the TV show, we were kind of forced into it. But I think another thing with them coming back in the 80s and they reviving it on MTV and started playing all the reruns around 85 or 86, whenever that was, I think that was when they did the first reunion tour. And they got out there, and again, because they had not played probably since the 60s or 70s, they get back together. People, they're seeing everything on MTV. A lot of people like me for the first time, just learning about the Monkees, and not realizing it's something that was, from the 60s. People are going to go see the band live for the first time, for some people in many years. Some people have never seen them before. And that kind of was the comeback for the Monkees. And from that point on, they've been trying to prove to fans, hey, you know what? See, we've done all these tours since we got back in 85 and 86, and we're able to go out and we're playing our own instruments.
Well, yeah, they even they even did a tour where Jimi Hendrix was opening up for them.
Wow, yeah. And
that's crazy. Jimi Hendrix did an interview and basically said that he thought they were a bunch of wankers. He thought they were horrible.
Yeah. And
well, in a way, they were put. The truth be known, they were put together by a movie studio or TV studio. It was not an organic thing. The only member that didn't have to do an audition was Davey Jones. The rest of the guys they found through auditions.
Yeah.
It was not an organic thing. But the impact was huge because I was a kid back in the mid 1960s, 65, 67, somewhere around then. That show, even though it only lasted 2 years, was extremely popular. Look at how the albums were outselling the show and everything.
Said it right there.
Their popularity was just through the roof.
And I dare say that they really played the part that they were hired to play really well. And again, what I mean by that is when I'm discovering the Monkees for the first time back in 1985, I'm just learning about this. And then, I discovered a TV show and everything. And I was kind of loving on some of the music. I really love the theme of the TV show, the theme of the Monkees. But I can tell you, when I was first discovering the band back in 85, I was convinced they were a real band, if you know what I mean. I believe...
Well, you got to admit, too, the show was funny.
Yeah, in fact, I want to give you some statistics about just how funny it was. Okay, the show aired, like you said, for 2 seasons, a total of 58 episodes. The show earned, get this, Gar, it earned 2 Emmy Awards in 1967, first for Outstanding Comedy Series, and then number 2 for Outstanding Directional Achievement. And again, you wouldn't think a TV show that's supposed to be based on a Beatles-like band is going to win any kind of Emmy Award. So I think right there, that's quite impressive.
Rightly so.
Yeah.
Because I was around back in those days, and I was talking to everybody at school and everything like that, and it was just kids were just talking about the show. It was extremely popular. Yeah,
and even before MTV started airing all the reruns back in 85, I remember they had a marathon or something, and they relaunched it. They started playing it on a regular basis back then. And I was reading also, talking about the staying power of the Monkees and the TV show. It was saying that the show went on to kind of have an afterlife. Because for one thing, it was very popular overseas, if you can believe that, and also before MTV ever got a hold of it, for several years they would rerun it on Saturday, when they used to have Saturday morning cartoons and that during Saturday morning, and so even before MTV got a hold of it, kids were launching onto watching it Saturday mornings. You can even believe that.
Well, it's kind of trippy how I didn't know this.
Yeah.
But I found out that because of the bad taste that Don Kirshner had from the backlash of the stars of the show wanting to have more control over the music and have it actually be them and represent them and everything like that, so they wouldn't have to worry about it being exposed to the public and everything like that. So Don Kirshner wound up, doing a Saturday morning cartoon called The Archies.
Oh, okay. Wow.
The Archies was a very, very popular Saturday morning cartoon during that time period. And so Don Kirshner could do the same thing that he was doing with the Monkees, but he didn't have to worry about, the backlash, because it was all animated characters and he could have full control over it and do it the way he saw fit. So, it's kind of trippy how he decided to go on and try to prove his point that his method of doing it was going to be better.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that Archies has had the staying power of the Monkees.
No.
People to this day still remember that Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah.
But the Monkees is it's iconic.
But see, that's an interesting part of a story that I kind of missed out on. I'm glad you brought it up, Gar, because it just goes to kind of show, okay, when you and I were initially talking about Don Kirshner in the past interview about Edgar Winter, we were talking about the fact that, Edgar Winter appeared on his rock concert show. And so this kind of shows you, okay, so this guy gets his start in the music industry, doing the, TV, working with the Monkees and that. And then because the band wants more control, he's let go from that. And then, like you said, the next thing he goes on to do is the Archies. And it kind of makes sense because, okay, he's maybe thinking, okay, we can do this with animation. There's not going to be much of a backlash. And for whatever reason, he was successful. Maybe not as successful as he was with the Monkees, but he was able to kind of carry on his career. And then eventually, I guess after they see he has success with that, he eventually goes on to have his, success with the rock concert. And I think eventually we're going to have to do an episode on both of these things because very interesting kind of story, but I think hadn't really ever been told. But getting back to the Monkees, it's just it's interesting because the Monkees had a revival. It says in 1986, as I've been saying, when MTV started running the episodes, and like people had never heard about the Monkees were just getting into it. And then the show also, besides Saturday morning, they were saying it's had a huge run in syndication, which is amazing when you consider there was only like 58 episodes. But I was also reading where when they filmed some of the episodes, they were short on time. So if you ever watch any of the shows, that's why sometimes they have interview clips with some of the band members, and they would show like behind the scenes stuff, and that was because they were short on time. Yeah, filler stuff, and I think that's one of the first shows to ever do something like that.
Well, you also, when you look at it, the Monkees and Don Kirshner's rock concerts paved the road to MTV.
Oh yeah, sure.
That's undeniable. You would have to be in total denial to not see that both the Monkees and Don Kirshner's rock concerts paved the road to MTV.
In fact, Gar, you were talking about that the show was put on by a TV studio, and I learned that the TV studio that was behind the Monkees is Screen Gems, which like, do you ever watch any of those old classic shows? I know you do, that we've talked about, like Bewitched, and I think maybe I Dream of Jeannie. They were also behind the Three Stooges, and interestingly enough, because of that, because it was the same studio that did the classic Three Stooges movies, they use a lot of the same sets that you see in some of the classic Three Stooges movies during the Monkees.
Trippy.
Yeah, and again, that's what I think we're gonna have to do with Three Stooges. But it's interesting how some of this stuff just kind of intertwines. And it says for its first season, 1966 to '67, the Monkees fared well in the TV ratings because of many hit records by the band. So again, because of the music, that's why most people were tuning into the show.
Well, here's another thing, that really kind of stands out versus 1965 and 1966 versus now.
Yeah.
Back then the show only lasted 2 seasons.
Yeah.
But those 2 seasons, they did almost 60 episodes.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah.
60 episodes. When you watch a show now, when a show is launched on, say, Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime, or when a show gets launched nowadays, a full season is 10 shows.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about, what today a full season is 10 shows versus back then 60 episodes, that's like 6 seasons. Yeah,
and again, just to kind of talk, really point out what we're talking about is more and more fans realize that the Monkees provided the vocals for the TV show. So the actual people, playing the parts, the band members, they provided, they did the talking, but then more and more people realized that they did it too at the band's live performances. But when the truth came out, there was a huge backlash from both fans and critics because the Monkees noticed that the albums outsold the ratings of a TV show consistently.
Yeah, I was one of those kids that, I had their albums.
Yeah.
I was listening to the albums and reading the lyrics, which is what everybody did back then. Just reading the lyrics to the songs as I'm listening to the songs, and and the songs were really catchy. Last Train to Clarksville, I'm a Believer. They were very catchy songs.
Now, here's some trivia for you. Do you know who was the guy who was actually the writer on Last Train to Clarksdale?
That I don't know, but I do know that early, when they were not writing the material and it was under the studio's control, the songwriters were Bobby Hart,
Well, this one's gonna
Jones and Hart. I know something Jones is his. I forgot his first name. But
well, you're right.
They were the songwriters.
You're right about that, but
the actual band started doing the songwriting.
You're right about that, but here's this, you're gonna be shocked by this. As far as Last Train to Clarksdale, the guy that wrote that, Neil Diamond.
Neil Diamond, became huge on his own.
Yeah.
He was a songwriter back in those days, a great one, obviously.
Yeah, and then it says in season 2, due in large part to the backlash over the fact that the Monkees did not write their own songs, where all of a sudden they were allowed, they kind of got demanding with the studio, okay, we're receiving all this backlash. We want to be able to write our own music. And at that point, both Mike Nesmith and Mickey Dolenz, they were allowed to contribute to the songwriting, and they were the only 2 in the band that ever received any kind of songwriting royalty. And what's interesting about Mike Nesmith is if the Monkees had never really worked out or been successful, he was already very wealthy because apparently his mother was the inventor of liquid paper, which is basically whiteout. Yeah.
Yes, and that's true.
Yeah.
His mother did invent that, which made his family very wealthy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just when I learned about it, I'm like, man, another Monkees connection, if you will,
It's funny because whiteout, I don't,
it still exists.
Yeah. It's like like almost non-existent anymore because the need for whiteout and everything is completely gone now.
Oh yeah. I mean,
but it's so funny because back in the day when it was invented, it was a revelation.
Yeah, and then I got some interesting kind of trivia or facts for you. Each of the Monkees was paid in the beginning of the very first season $450 per episode. Now, again, when you talk about new TV shows that are premiering today, that is a very low fee that the actors were receiving back then. But that's how much the world has changed.
Well, but then also back in the mid-1960s, you could buy a house for $20,000.
Yeah, and then here's another...
Less than you would buy a car today.
Yeah, and here's some other interesting facts I learned. The Monkees had a standard royalty rates for their recording and publishing for the songs they did write. So they received virtually nothing when it came to all the Monkees merchandise. So very interesting. While Mike Nesmith and Mickey Dolenz were allowed to kind of do some writing, they're the only two that ever received any publishing, and rightfully so. But for all the Monkees t-shirts and posters and other types of merchandise that's been out there all these years, they never got a piece of that. Can you believe that?
Well, because it was so much in its infancy that artists
didn't know about that.
Weren't thinking along those lines and protecting themselves with copyrights and things like that. It was all in its development stages back in those days. Because merchandising for a band, they weren't thinking about it, but of course, who was? The people in the offices. Hey, we can capitalize on this and we can start making merchandise and making money. And of course, they jumped on it and took full advantage of it.
Yeah, just to kind of prove that point, I was reading that a lot of shows back in the day, I mean, you take a show like the Brady Bunch that, it was only I think on for 5 seasons or something like that. But they had enough run of a show that they were able to be very successful in syndication. And yet I was reading all the ones that were making, it was the same producer, Mac Sherwood Schwartz, but like the Brady Bunch, Gilligan's Island, both, you see a ton of reruns, and they release it on DVD and all that. And they play it on all these classic things we watch, like TV Land. The producers are making all the money. I mean, when those things are shown today, the actors don't get any kind of residuals because, like you said, back in the day, the law was very different. But it's just kind of a shame that these people have this kind of success, but they don't get to enjoy any of the residuals.
Well, but then again, you think about it, for a TV show that only lasted 2 seasons, all 4 of those guys enjoyed being able to make a living for many, many decades after the end of that show. Yeah,
and I got to tell you, Gar, what really kind of gave me the idea to do this show is back in December, Mike Nesmith passed away. I think he had a heart attack. And so Mickey Dolenz is the only surviving member of the Monkees now. The other 3 guys have all passed on. But you're right. I mean, because of a show that lasted 2 seasons, all 4 of the guys were able to, do this thing called the Monkees for the rest of their life until, the 3 guys died. And I think even up until the very end, Mickey Dolenz and Mike Nesmith were going out together, kind of a celebration of the Monkees, if you will. But Mickey Dolenz is really the only one, left, really. And the thing is, even talk about Davey Jones for a minute. I brought up the Brady Bunch. I don't know if you remember, he did an episode of the Brady Bunch.
Yes, and he was on Brady Bunch. He was everywhere because Davey Jones, was kind of the Paul McCartney of the band.
Yeah.
Paul McCartney, by the girls Beatles was considered to be the cutest of the Beatles, and of course they latch onto the cutest guy, and the cutest guy in the Monkees was Davey Jones. So he was on Laugh-In.
Yeah.
He was on all kinds of TV shows.
Yeah.
Guest appearances here, guest appearances there.
And I remember when he appeared on the Brady Bunch. I mean, it was this episode where it was about Marcia and her girlfriends are put in charge of having a dance at school. They're like the entertainment committee, and Marcia, because she's the president of a Davey Jones fan club, she promises that she can get him to perform at the prom because he sent her a fan letter that he appreciated everything she did. So they had to track him down, and of course by the end of a 30-minute show, he does agree to appear, and he shows up at the house, and everybody. Family Brady meets them, and it turns out the way it's supposed to. But again, that was a real kind of fun episode because at that point, the Monkees were really a thing of the past at that time, and they really wouldn't have any kind of revival until like '85, like we said. And so it's in talking about pop culture like this, it's interesting that because of these guys were involved in the Monkees, a show that was only on for 2 seasons, a guy like Davey Jones is able to kind of continue on his career. People know him from the Monkees. He appears on all these other shows. It allows them to do that. I think it's great that they can have that kind of career,
Well, the two producers, Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider, how they discovered Davey Jones.
Yeah.
They were watching the Ed Sullivan Show.
Yeah, I read that.
The actual shows that the Beatles
appeared on
when they first came across the pond to perform here in the United States.
Yeah.
And the very first performance the Beatles ever did was on the Ed Sullivan Show, because the Ed Sullivan Show at that time was the biggest show, period. And if you were ever going to grab America's attention, they had to be on his show. Well, guess who else? Because the Ed Sullivan Show was a variety show where he would get up and introduce the next act, and it could be a stand-up comedian, it could be a singer, it could be a musical performing group, you know what I mean? But it was a mixed match of all kinds of different performances. And Davey Jones was on that show that the Beatles did their first performance in the United States. Davey Jones was also on that same episode of the Ed Sullivan Show, and the producers, Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider, saw him, and they latched onto him, and that's why he didn't have to do an audition. He was already in. He was already chosen.
Talk about a fluke, or how ironic. I was reading that too, and this kind of goes on to kind of prove what we've been talking about as far as the Monkees being very much modeled after Beatles. I was reading the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, was the inspiration behind the Monkees TV show. So again,
yes.
And then talking about when the show is getting ready to be canceled, as the series was about to be renewed for season 3. The band decided that they wanted to change the show format from the sitcom that it was. They wanted, I think, very much because of maybe the Sullivan Show and other shows like that at the time. They wanted to go from being a sitcom to having their own variety show. Okay, and again, the studio, being what it was at the time, became very frustrated, and they told the band, look, stick with the format that has worked for the first 2 seasons of the show, or the show is going to be canceled. And in the end, that's what ended up happening, because the band started wanting to have a variety show. They wanted to have more control over it. They didn't want NBC telling them what to do, and so so NBC got frustrated and just told them, okay, well, you want to kind of go against what's been working, and so you guys can go and do your own thing. And then, in 1968, the band eventually kind of, came in for a while.
Well, I think that's your classic story of the young, brash, musician rebellion thing, and the older generation working in the offices, are trying to keep these guys under control. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's the typical, tug of rope between the younger generation and the older generation.
I mean, you got basically what it is. It's that war that you're talking about between the talent and the people with the money. The people with the money are like, we're going to control you, and you're going to do it our way because we're the ones, pulling the purse strings. We're ones with the money, and you better do it our way or else. And then you got the talent saying, well, we're the talent, and you can't have a show without us. And then so it's kind of an ultimate of who's going to win that war. And here's another interesting thing I read that I found very interesting. I think you will too, Gar. Midway through season 2, the Monkees, the band, they demanded that the laugh track be dropped from the show. I guess the Monkees were one of the very first TV shows to actually have a laugh track. And of course, I mean, if you've ever watched any of these shows we talk about, like All in the Family, Happy Days, Three's Company, you listen back to any of those reruns, and they have a laugh track, which it kind of tells you when you're supposed to laugh, in case you didn't know. I mean, I went to some TV tapings back in the day, and you sit in the studio, and then they tell you, okay, well, when you hear the laugh track, we want you to laugh, because they want to get like real kind of audience's reaction. That's the whole point. But they like, we don't think we need to tell the audience when to laugh. We think they get it.
There's certain decisions that are the right decisions, and then there's certain decisions that are maybe on paper they sound right, but maybe they're not. And the laugh tracks became a staple, whether the Monkees wanted it or not. Trying to stop that from happening is like trying to hold back the ocean. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, that I think that was a losing cause on their part. But I just know that back in the day it was just. It was such a different TV show because everything was like cop shows and all this different, and then all of a sudden you had this hippie show.
Yeah, and
where everybody's dressing up with long hair and dressing like the hippies and the fashion of that time, and it was a stark difference. When that show came on compared to everything else that was going on TV at the time. Yeah,
Gar, that's one of the reasons. Besides, kind of getting the idea when Mike Nesmith passed away, I'm thinking, this would be a fun episode to do on the Monkees. I mean, for so many reasons. I mean, it was a very different TV show, like you're saying at the time. I dare say there was nothing else on there like that at the time. I mean, if you stop and think about the Monkees TV show, even predates, Sonny and Cher having a TV show. So, I mean, that's kind of what comes after the fact. But, also we got to talk about, as we often do, what if? And what I'm talking about is, okay, we know who ultimately got casted as the Monkees, but what I was reading was kind of interesting is some of the other people that were considered for this before they made the final casting choice. Originally, the show's producers considered, get this, to cast either the Dave Clark 5 or the Lovin' Spoonful, but decided to pick 4 unknown actors for the 4 main cast members. Just think about that for a minute.
Well, the Lovin' Spoonful couldn't do it because they had already. What happened is they had signed a record contract, which meant that the TV show had to pass on them because they wouldn't be able to market the music of the show, which was a big part of the show.
Yeah, and just to give people an idea who may not know who the Lovin' Spoonful is, I mean, they were very big. They performed at Woodstock. That's how far back that band goes. But and then the singer, John Sebastian, would go on to have a huge hit in the 70s when he wrote the theme song, and this is a solo artist, for Welcome Back, Kotter.
It is huge success, but he was, that was his crown achievement.
Yeah.
He also was known for singing the theme song for many other TV shows at the time too.
Yeah.
So he was very sought after
at that time.
Back in the 70s for performing the theme songs for TV shows. It wasn't just Welcome Back, Kotter. There was more that he did, but Welcome Back, Kotter was the most popular of them all.
Yeah, and then here's another cool fact that kind of makes sense, I guess. Initially, Michael Nesmith was nicknamed Wool Hat, of course, because of the little black kind of
the
beanies that he wore. He showed up to his audition wearing his trademark wool hat. He did not like the nickname, and he made that known, and so very soon after they stopped calling him, I guess, because he didn't like it. But again, this is kind of interesting because you got a character, like Slash from Guns N' Roses. That one of the things, besides his guitar playing, and you know this when I'm talking about paying tribute with your band, Appetite for Destruction, to Guns N' Roses. So one thing is Slash is a very iconic character, not just for his guitar playing, but his image. Oftentimes you'll see like just kind of a shadow or a silhouette. We know it's Slash, or he's known also for that famous top hat.
Absolutely.
This guy, Michael Nesmith,
and
predates
you're
that.
right about that. Mike Nesmith's beanie had that same effect.
Because very much it's kind of interesting that we even probably mentioned Michael Nesmith more than Davey Jones today, and I say that because nothing against Davey Jones. He was a big part of the success of Monkees. He's a front man, but I think part of it is Michael Nesmith. Part of it, we got to be honest, the wool hat. Everybody knows, that's the guy that wore the wool hat. Oh, that's who we're talking about. And that plays a big role in that,
Sure did.
And then again, with the death of Michael Nesmith on 12/10, Mickey Dolenz is the surviving member. So I guess, that's very unfortunate. But I guess for him, he's kind of, he's in control of the legacy of the Monkees now. I guess he can do with it what he sees fit.
Well, he is still planning on touring, celebrating the music of the Monkees,
which I think is a fair thing to do.
But what I read is he's still planning on doing it as a tribute to the other three members.
Yeah, and I think that's the way to do it because you're not going out there going to try to fool anybody that you are the Monkees. That's really a thing of the past, and I think that's kind of a way to do it. Okay, I'm going to go out and honor these other three guys that were a part of this,
Yeah. It's so hard for people that didn't grow up during that time, to mentally digest, what we're talking about. I think the appeal of people listening to this are going to be the people that either appreciated the Monkees as a retro, kind of a thing, or people like me that that were actually alive and aware of what was going on when the show hit the TV screens. It's hard to kind of really kind of grasp what we're talking about. But I think the best way to really understand why we're putting such an importance on a show that only lasted 2 seasons is because of the statement of them being able to have a career still producing Monkee tours and TV shows and just having a very nice way to make a living for the rest of their lives. It only lasted 2 seasons, but we're still here. We are still talking about the
Yeah, and so at this point, the Monkees have been around like something like 50 plus years, and that's quite an achievement for something was initially only a 2-season show, like 58 episodes, like we said. And I think for me, why I have such appreciation for it now is, okay, I mean, like we said, okay, it was really a TV sitcom. And I think the guys they hired ultimately, the 4 guys, Peter Tork, Mike Nesmith, Davey Jones, and Mickey Dolenz, they played the part really well. So much to the point, like I said, that Davey Jones is the only one that's actually from England, but I thought all the guys were from England because they're presented as a Beatles type band. I think, oh, they must all be from England. And then, I bought what they were selling, kind of. And then when you stop and realize people were tuning in, more people were buying the albums, were actually buying the TV show. And yet, in spite of that, if you check out any of the episodes, which I think you can do if you go on YouTube and check out there's even something that they used to have on VH1. It's like a documentary called Behind the Music. They have an episode on the Monkees. People should check that out. That'd give you a great kind of history on who the band was. But I think the other kind of interesting thing, people think like people can only have one talent. I mean, okay, so people were buying the albums, but also if you're watching the shows, the guys, even if the script was written for them, you watch a show and you can't help but laugh. I mean, some of the stuff they were saying was kind of funny. And again, they got the right actors. I was sold on what they were selling, if you know what I mean.
They were funny.
They were funny.
They were very good at playing the characters on the show. They were funny.
And they entertained us because, like you said, we're still talking about, and that's, to me, okay, so these guys, they sold a lot of records. They played the part well. They said some funny lines. It entertained us, So, mission accomplished, as you say.
Absolutely. And, they even came out with a movie, a few years later, kind of smashing the squeaky clean
image,
stereotype of the characters that they were on the show and everything. They came out with a very rebellious movie called Head.
Yeah.
And I never really paid attention to it, and I never really, cared that much about it. But one day, back in, I think it was like the mid-70s, say 1976, I was in a band, and we used to practice in Venice Beach, and the drummer and I lived way out in West Covina.
Wow.
And we would drive out to Venice Beach on Friday and spend the entire weekend out there practicing, and then drive back on Sunday night.
Wow.
And sometimes, after practice, we would go out, in the city, and, one time we went and watched a movie, because it was kind of a retro thing to go watch the movie late at night to see things, that were not brand new movies that were being replayed, kind of like, what they did with Rocky Horror Picture Show, but that was being done with other things too. And I went to a movie, and they played that movie Head, and I had very, very low expectations. I was just going, oh great, okay, well, I guess we're here, so we'll watch it. And it turned out to be very entertaining. I liked it. They had a bunch of very surprising people, showing up in the movie, like Frank Zappa.
Wow.
And Jack Nicholson, and it was just it was a real surprise. I didn't expect much in it, and because the movie was a flop.
Wow,
it really wasn't successful when they released it. But I loved it.
That's interesting. Sometimes when you let a band, a group of guys kind of just do what they want and kind of have control and do it their way, it's funny, how, that it can actually turn out quite good. But we're going to wrap it up for today, Gar. But just to kind of, I want to thank you again for doing this. It was a lot of fun as always. And tell people what we have coming up now. In 2 weeks when we get together again, we're going to start recording episode 20, which is going to be a 3-parter, just to kind of whet people's appetite. It's going to be on the film American Graffiti. Now, part 1 is going to be on the original film American Graffiti. And then in episode 2, which will be recorded like 2 weeks after that, we're going to be talking about the music of American Graffiti, kind of talking about the soundtrack and all that. And that's going to be a lot of fun. And finally...
Well, the soundtrack was a huge part of American Graffiti.
Oh, sure it was. And that's why I thought we needed to kind of divide it up into 3 separate episodes. And then finally, episode 3 is going to be... We find out there's actually a follow-up film like in 1979. I wasn't even aware of it. They had a follow-up film, and that's part of the reason we're going to talk about it. And so that's going to be a little bit fun. We have other stuff to coming up after that we'll get into later. But thanks for doing this, Gar. I'm going to let you go, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Dude, oh my gosh.
And just to let you know, Gar.
Awesome. Thank you for, thank you for everything. I cannot express how much fun I have.
Oh, sure.
You can doing this.
You can hear it in your voice, but that's why we do it. And just to let you know, this episode, we're going to have it up next Saturday for everybody to watch. So tune in for that, Gar, and we'll talk to you then.
All good, brother.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.